biblical for sure. Teach it balance, preach it bold, 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 bold. Papa said build a bridge, must subtract the division. Discernment dictate decisions, relationship and religion. Hardest days to be balanced, seen the world so cold. Leaders barely being biblical, boys afraid to be bold. Ain't the Jesus I know, all praise to the chief. One and only high priest, son of God with the keys. Price of life ain't cheap, paid in blood not clean. Wanna cross over water, follow what he taught us, start walking. I'ma go build a bridge. Yeah, he said build a bridge. A lot of tensions on the sides, word be dividing truth from the fibs. Christ lighting it's lit, time to go build a bridge. Teach it balance, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balance, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balance, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balance, preach it bold, 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 bold.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Bridge. This is Jesse Bailey here, your host, and I'm just so glad that you all are joining me this evening. We have a very hot topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, but before we get into the topic of white privilege, that's what we're going to be speaking on, I just wanted to give everybody a little refresher on what The Bridge is about. So this was something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, but as the world circumstances would have it, I felt it necessary to launch now rather than later on in the year when I was planning on doing it. And the idea is to create a forum where we can have open, honest conversation about what's going on in our world as it relates to politics, faith, social justice, whatever's going on in our world. It just so happens that we happen to be in the middle of a very chaotic time with the onset of COVID-19 and then now the racial division that we're seeing in our nation. So we want to attack these issues, and I wanted to create a forum where we can actually speak about it and we can have a context where there's free flow of information without the restrictions of just simple social media text. You lose so much in that. You lose tone. You really lose the humanity of that person. So this is why we only do live shows. The videos are always available to watch later on, but for the most part, I like to do it live. That way it's raw, it's real, it's authentic, and we can just be ourselves. And I also like the interpersonal exchange because now we can really talk back and forth and hear each other's hearts and not just read each other's words. So we have three principles on The Bridge that govern our conversation, and that is this. Number one, we want to keep it balanced. While we all have positions that we take and reasons why we take those positions, we want to make sure that we have a balanced approach and we're looking at both sides of the issue. The reason that's important is because if we just look at it from our side, then that means that everyone that's not on our side is just an enemy. And we have to remember that these are human beings and they're not just evil drones walking around because they don't have your same opinion. There's a reason why they feel the way they feel and they think the way they think. And if we open ourselves up to embrace that and understand that, then we can build that bridge and come together and really develop a greater understanding of each other and come to the ultimate thing which we are searching for, and that is truth. That is what we're really building a bridge for. It's to go from where we are to that place of truth, wherever that is. So we're building bridges between faith and science, between racial and ethnic groups, between political beliefs, with all of that going towards discovering truth. So that's really the purpose of keeping it balanced. Second thing is we want to keep it bold. That means that we speak the truth without fear of judgment. So we want to make sure that we're not being judged when we talk about how we're thinking and how we're feeling, and that we have an open heart. If we don't have an open forum, then it's hard for us to be bold. Bold doesn't mean loud and boisterous or audacious. It simply means speaking the full truth in your entire heart without restriction, without hindrance. So we want to be able to be bold on the show. And then the last thing and most important is that we want to keep it biblical. For those of you who are watching, I am a Christian, and that is my worldview. I have a biblical worldview, which simply means that I look at life and reality through the context of the Holy Scriptures. That is the foundation of my life. It is my moral foundation, but more than that, it is the foundation of how I perceive reality. So that is the perspective that we're looking at things through. Now, with that said, my intent was to begin the entire show with episodes explaining why the Bible is my worldview that I choose. But given the context, we're going to do that at a later time, so I invite you back for those conversations. But for tonight, we are going to be taking on the issue of white privilege. Now, white privilege is a term that has been thrown around quite a bit during this time. And over the last several years, we saw it pop up originally back in the 80s, but we need to address this issue of white privilege. The reason it came to mind for me this week is not only because I've been seeing it on social media being passed around quite a bit, and the context and the nature that it's being used, but something very specific happened. And if you had an opportunity to watch the introduction for the show, I explained how I had a conversation with a pastor friend of mine this week. He's a white pastor, a very good man. He's a white pastor that pastors in completely, almost completely Spanish and black church. And he had shot me a text this week. And he said, just wanted to check in, let you know that I appreciate you, I love you, and thinking about you during these times. I was like, man, that's really cool. But as I read it again, and this is a brother that I don't get to talk to very often, which is true with most pastors because they're very busy. I was like, man, I wonder what inspired this. So I gave him a call, and I was like, hey, brother, and we had a really good conversation. I was so encouraged, and he was encouraged, and it was just a God thing. But in the middle of it, I said, brother, I got to ask you, did you feel a sense of obligation to send me that text because I'm an African-American man and we see the circumstances that we are in the nation? Are you feeling that pressure? And he was very honest. He said, you know what? I was thinking about texting, calling you, so it was really out of the sincerity of my heart, but I did feel that pressure, and I had to stop and pause and make sure that I was calling you because it was what I felt led to do, and just calling you as a brother in Christ, and not just because you are African American. And the reason that triggered that, in combination with so many of the things that I've been seeing on social media and the idea of white privilege, is that it seems like this term that is being used in a manner in order to guilt and shame white people into action. The action that those who are really pushing this cause, and it's a cause that we should all be fighting for. We should all be fighting for justice. We should all be fighting for equality. But it seems to be something that we are using as a weapon against white people to try and force them into a place of social submission almost. And we see that. I'm sure you've seen the videos of white people kneeling down, and I don't know if all of those are authentic or if it's just something that is made up. But if it's not true physically, certainly it is emotionally from a lot of the posts that I'm seeing. I've spoken with some African Americans who felt that the silence of white people was an issue. And my question was, well, what do you want them to say? What do you want them to do? And some even said, if you could just reach out to an African American, say we support you, and I can understand that. I can understand that there are people that would want that type of affirmation when they feel that there is a devaluing that has happened because of the color of their skin and because of what happened to someone who looks like them. On the surface, I definitely understand that. However, some of the verbiage and the language that has been used to attack people really is what's really concerned me. And as Christians, we are so careful that we don't put guilt and shame on people. This is what we believe, that there is good and evil, and one of the advocates of evil is called Satan. And one of the tactics that he uses is guilt and shame of your past to try and keep you bound in your present. And I can't help but wonder if that tactic is being used and employed here when we talk about white privilege. So I want to talk about how it's being used, but I also want to talk about the reality of it. What is the reality and the extent of white privilege? Is it something that's true? Is it something that's false? Is it something that's overrated? What is white privilege, and how do we interact with that if it is a truth? Certainly, using it as a weapon to make people feel guilty for past wrongs is not the thing. One of the things that I said in the video, and I sincerely feel this, is that if you didn't own me, then you don't owe me anything. One of the principles that we see described in the Bible, again, keeping it biblical, and this is just a universal principle that God established in regards to our faults and our past faults. In Ezekiel chapter 18, God says that he will not put the guilt of the father on the sons, nor the guilt of the sons on the father. Each man will bear the guilt on his own life. Meaning that if I do something wrong, then it can't be imputed to my children. And if my children do something wrong, it can't be imputed to me in a guilt and conscience sense. Now, obviously, my kids break a window across the street, then daddy's going to pay for that because they're my responsibility. But that's a parental responsibility, not a civil or certainly racial responsibility. So I want to know what your thoughts are on that. So as we get into our conversation, I want you guys to be able to text in your questions, and then there may be some people that I would like to call. So if you're open to me calling you, don't call me, I'll call you. Then I would love to hear from you. Here's the phone number up on the screen right now that you can text your questions into, your comments. And then this is also the phone number that I would be calling you from in the event that we do have that conversation. So I want to open this up tonight with just some questions. My co-host tonight is you, our listening audience. So if you have any questions or comments about the topic, I would love to hear from you. Let me start by going just over the definition of privilege. So privilege, according to Webster's Dictionary, is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Let me read that again. Is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. So when we talk about white privilege, then we would say that white privilege are special rights, advantages, or immunities granted or available only to white people. So what are some special rights, advantages, or immunities that are granted only to white people simply because they are white? What would some of those advantages be? So let's jump in and let's see if there's anybody who has any response to that right now. What are some of the advantages that come along with the privilege of being white? One of the things that I've heard is the idea of perception. And I think a lot of the white privilege conversation revolves around perception. How people view a white person as opposed to how they would view me as a man of color. I think we can all agree that, generally speaking, there is a different initial reaction that people receive because of their exterior looks. And this isn't just a black or white thing. This is a black thing, white thing, brown thing, Asian, whatever you are. There is a certain perception that is carried. And it's actually documented that, for example, it is documented that if in terms of turning in applications, if you have a quote unquote white name, you are twice as likely to get a call back than you are if you have a black name. I mean, that is a statistical fact. So in that case, we do have to acknowledge that there are certain privileges that go along with being a Caucasian individual. Now, with that, we also have to acknowledge that there are also privileges that go along with several other things outside of just the color of your skin. Some of which are much more telling than whether you're black or white. For example, the greatest issue, not only in the black community, but within any community, and this is statistically speaking, remember we're looking for truth here. And the wonderful thing about numbers is that numbers don't lie. They're always true, unless of course somebody's making up stats. But let's just assume that these stats that come from a variety of different sources are accurate. The number one indicator for things such as teen pregnancy, teen drug abuse, mental illness, education, and the level of education you go to, poverty, going to college. The number one statistic that influences all of those areas, going to prison, is this: fatherlessness. Fatherlessness. That is the number one indicator for all of those different areas that I just talked about. If you have a father, and that is whether you have a black father, a white father, an adopted father, whatever it is, if you have a male influence in the home, and they don't even have to be a good one, statistically, if you have a male presence in the home, then you are more likely to not fall into mental illness, not fall into drug abuse, not fall into alcohol abuse, graduate from high school, attend college, not be in poverty. That is the number one statistic. So, would it be fair for those who have experienced that? Because I had a wonderful father in my home, and I am so blessed to be able to say that, and it inspires me to be that for my children. Do I have fatherhood privilege then? And should that be used as a weapon against me to say you need to be doing more for the fatherless? I mean, it sounds like a reasonable argument. But that is actually the number one privilege that anyone in the world has, is to have a father in their house. But we don't tout that around. But we do tout around white privilege. And it's interesting because while it does exist, it doesn't seem to be nearly as vital as a statistic as that. And we're going to talk about other privileges, but I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. We have a call-in request. I'm going to call this gentleman right now, talking about white privilege. Let's see if we can get Brother Durant on the phone here.
Hello.
Durant, you're on the bridge with Jesse Bailey. How you doing, brother?
Yes, Pastor. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Doing very well. So you had asked to call in about the topic of white privilege. What was on your heart?
Well, for me personally, Pastor, I want to start by saying, I don't want to begin to associate my thoughts with how society thinks. Since I'm in Jesus Christ's kingdom, I want to make sure that I approach this from his point of view, or how he wants us to actually approach things of this world. Now, there is such thing as a white privilege. We know that. We see that throughout history. But I personally believe that the problem, and just bear with me, please, I personally believe that the problem stems from within the church. Mm. And what I mean is, we who are in Jesus Christ's kingdom, who are under the lordship of Jesus Christ, we are called to act and behave in a certain way. He has laid out his rules in the Bible. We have pastors that guide us on how we should go about doing things. Now, we see that in the church, the movement towards how society wants us to act is being dictated along the line. So basically, Jesus Christ asks us to do certain things, but the church starts to, okay, we're going to be watered down in our approach. We want to fit in with the world. We don't want to, get them too, upset. We want them to see that we can go along with them in anything, and at the same time saying that we believe in Jesus Christ. It's that thing where I kind of find it really hard to understand, if we're really under Jesus Christ's lordship, why is it that we have to conform to the world as a church? Racism should never have happened if the church stands up and say this is wrong. Mm-hmm. We're going to protest. We're going to protest according to how God wants us to protest. We're going to gather. We're going to speak out about it, whether it's racism or whether it's homelessness homosexuality, anything across the board that goes against God, we should always be out there. We shouldn't be seeing the secular world, such as Black Lives Matters, making a stand. You know, that to me personally speaks a lot of where we're at the body of Christ. No, don't get me wrong, no, Pastor. I strongly believe that there are a few churches that is standing the course and fighting for what Jesus Christ wants us to fight for. But that's just a few, you know? And that's where my problem is, because I look at the world, specifically, I look at the United States, and I see that there's a great increase in poverty. There's a lot of homelessness. Now we have issues with, you know, sexual identity. You know, there's the homosexual, and God called us to love everyone. You know, but we have to take a stand, and we have to take a stand with love.
Yes.
You know, it's easy for us. It's easy for us to be in the church, listening to the pastor say certain things, and we say, "Amen, yes, it's right." But when we go out there, we put on the world clothing, and we act as if, you know, nothing ever happened. So this is what we're seeing now in society, because the church has become too watered down, you know, and nothing is getting done. So we see racism. We see racism to a next level. You know, I don't really want to put my thoughts on the fact that, well, it's because of white people hate black people, that's why it's like that. You know, I cannot speak like that, because, you know, given my background, you know, I'm from a family that's mixed. You know, I'm half Chinese, my dad is Black Scottish. You know, I wasn't really brought up in the United States. You know, I was brought up out of the United States, but when I moved here, you know, I see things. I understand both sides.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, Pastor, where we're looking at the wrong thing. And a wise man once says that if all that you see is what you see, you do not see all there is to be seen. Everything is happening in the spiritual realm. And as believers, we have to address it from that point.
Yes.
We cannot go along with the world in the way things are, in the way the world wants us to behave. We have to take our stand. And I just see the church slowly being diminished. The power is being pulled away. And we won't see God show up and do his amazing work, because the church is not united. You know, I just see, that's just where my thought is at. I don't see this as, well, I'm sorry?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see it as the fact that, well, what's going on out there in the world has nothing to do with the church. You know, no, the church plays a big role in what's happening in the world.
I agree with you, Duran. I agree 100%. But I want to cut in real quick, and I want to ask you a question. So you said quite a bit, and I want to kind of jump in and break a few things down. So you mentioned church standing up, initiating the protests rather than outside movements, not being silent. You mentioned several things that are near to God's heart in terms of us avoiding them, such as racism, gender identity issues, etc. So in regards to what we're seeing right now, what would you say the church, if the church would do this one thing, this would make the biggest difference? So the one thing that the church can do that would make the biggest difference right now.
Well, the one thing that I can think of is to rally other churches to put together a spiritual march. You know, let's title it a spiritual march. And we go out there and we show Black Lives That Matters, how things should be done under God's law. I believe, for example, Pastor, this is just an example. Let's say the pastor of Church A decide to put together, a small protest with Church B, and then Church B hopefully reach out to Church C, and they all come together and go out there and show the world how God's kingdom operates in a peaceful, spiritual manner. That's what I see. I can't really see, the church go along with Black Lives Matter. Let's go ahead and march with them. No. We need to set an example. We need to show the secular world that this is how it's done. And by you seeing this, you should want to come and join us. You should want to come to know who's this Jesus Christ. We don't need to be, talking about like, well, this is all white people's fault. This is, this is what the enemy wants. He wants us to be so divided that we are so confused. And the funny thing about it, Pastor, he wants God's kingdom to be so confused while he keeps his kingdom intact.
That's absolutely right. And that's one of the things that we see. And that's why touting things like white privilege, and especially from Christians, especially from believers, doesn't seem very constructive to me for several reasons. I mean, I read one post that said, if you're not using your white privilege to help black people, you're part of the problem. And that was from a Christian, and those types of words I think are counterproductive and don't really work. I think it's, and I'm going to say it again, throwing your white privilege this, your white privilege that, it's bullying. You're bullying people. I've seen it time and time again where people are saying, you're not doing enough. If you're just standing on your lawn with a flashlight, you're not doing enough. You guys are being too silent. And really a lot of it to me is just antagonistic. And again, you're bullying people and trying to pressure people to do something. And these people didn't even do anything. And to be quite honest, you as someone who's saying you're silent, you have no clue. How do you know who's being silent? Are you judging them just because they are posting or not posting on social media? That's a very carnal way to judge someone, if you should be judging them at all. It seems that we throw a lot of our principles in terms of Christianity out the window when it comes to social justice issues. We always want to say, don't judge. Yet when it comes to something like this, we are casting judgment all over people and saying, you should be speaking up, you should be at these protests, when actually there's no biblical foundation for protests in terms of the way we see them today. There's no mandate on the church to do that. That's never a tool that's given to the church. Even though I think it's effective, I think protest is absolutely fine. It shows unity, solidarity, and says to a government that's supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people, that the people care about this. So I do think that there is definitely merit in it, and I agree with you that there should be a movement that can start within the church to help with that. But it's only if the church will abandon their the secular carnal mentality and stop being accusatory towards people. My wife, who is white, who does a lot. She does a lot in terms of breaking racial boundaries, not because she posts something or doesn't post something on social media, but just her very character, her nature, the way she loves everyone, treats everyone the same. I mean, that's part of what you do, is you live the life of a Christian. And to be honest, as believers, that is the most important thing we can do, is live the life that Christ told us. If we would live more like Jesus, then we wouldn't have to march so much with the world. I agree with you. The church has to take some responsibility. But I also want to say this, that the church's job is not to transform the world, it's to transform a life. Remember that we are the salt of the world, which means we are merely preserving the inevitable. That this world is on a decaying path and breaking down, and we are preserving that. We just need to make sure that we are participating in the preservation in a manner that's going to glorify God. So Durant, I appreciate you calling in, brother. I really thank you for taking the time to do that. Let me know if you got anything else to share. We're gonna jump to another call real quick. God bless you, brother.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
So family, that was a great conversation, and Durant brings up a good point. Where's the church in all this? And a lot of what I'm seeing in the church, and something that Durant said, is that we seem to be more participatory in the aggravation of things rather than being solution oriented. And I see it in a lot. I was in a Facebook exchange today where someone is saying, on the other, someone put up a post that just simply shared a scripture, that blessed are the peacemakers, encouraging people to be at peace. Just a simple post. And this individual came back and was like, yeah, well, there's peace that only comes on the other side of a war. And I was taken back because this is a believer. I'm like, you're calling for a war because of what? Because of white privilege? Yes, there's racism, but no war is going to solve that. Obviously, we had the Civil War where we lost over 750,000 lives, the most lives lost by Americans at any time, and that didn't solve racism. So how is another war with more loss of life going to solve racism? Remember, racism isn't a systemic problem, it's a sin problem. All isms are a problem, and we need to address those. We need to address those things in a spiritual manner. And that's not to say that we don't do things in the physical, but what I'm saying is when we start participating in worldly rhetoric, then we get worldly results. When we start doing things like calling for war, and regardless of what was meant, what was heard was pretty explicit. So things like that should not be coming out of Christians' mouths. I don't care how mad you are, how angry you are. The Bible says to be angry, but don't sin. We see one of the greatest movements in terms of civil rights led by Dr. Martin Luther King, and this happens, and all of a sudden everybody abandons it. We saw much more atrocities against the black community during that time, yet it was peaceful protests and marches that ended it. Yet we want to abandon what was most effective and go back to rioting, which all it does is perpetuate the stereotypes that are given to the black community. So I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that, just in terms of how we are handling much of this as well. Let me go back to the phones here. The analogy used for other privileges, while some points are valid, you can't equate the right and the result. My background may have made it difficult for me to accomplish certain things, but my race makes it impossible, that's a key word, impossible, for me to be viewed as an equal. White privilege affords them the right to stay alive during a traffic stop. One is privileged, and one is your journey, where it may lead you due to your circumstances. Okay, so I want to address this. There's several points here. So the earlier analogies that I was using, just in terms of the privilege of having a father in the household, that one being the most prevalent of all privileges in the world, and that is a statistical fact. My background may have made it difficult for me to accomplish certain things, but my race makes it impossible for me to be viewed as an equal. I want to address that issue right there. And by all means, if you, this individual, I don't know who you are, if you would like to call in, please text me back and say, yes, I'd like to respond over the phone. I'd love to have the conversation with you. But that word, it is impossible for me to be viewed as an equal. That's more of a condition. I believe that's more of a condition of how we view ourselves than how the world views us. I'm an African-American male. I have been in several situations where I've been judged because of the color of my skin, attacked, pursued, chased, discriminated against, tons of them. More some than few, because I happen to live in the skinhead capital of the world for a few years of my life. But I was never taught by my father to view anything as impossible. I never thought anything was impossible. And because of the mindset that I was given by my father who taught me, my mother who instilled that in me, and by the faith that they gave me through the Lord Jesus Christ, God says with him, all things are possible. So I never thought for 1 second that I would not be able to accomplish something because of the color of my skin. If we go around looking at ourselves like that, then of course, it's like the old adage says, if you think it's impossible or you think you can't do it, you're right. You can't. So I think that points to more of an internal mindset than it does to an external reality. Is the reality of racism true? Absolutely. But I don't think as African Americans we have cornered the market on oppression. There are people who are oppressed because of the color of their skin. There are people who are oppressed because they're overweight. And there's people who are oppressed because they're not physically as attractive as certain people. How about good-looking privilege? It's a statistical fact that if you meet the standard of good looks, your life is way easier. You get more promotions. You get more attention. You get higher paying jobs. You're more likely to have friends. If you're a good looking person, you have a privilege, and that privilege supersedes race as well. So the idea that it makes it impossible for you to be viewed as equal, I think that's more of an internal mindset than it is an external thing. You can do whatever you want. With God, all things are possible. All things are possible. You can do anything. My parents taught me, looking at my father, and I know I'm talking about my father a lot, but he was such a wonderful example of how a man of color who went through hell. He went through some real stuff, both because of the color of his skin and just life circumstances, and yet overcame. And I'll share more of his story later. But when I look at him, who literally had crosses burned on his lawn, was stopped by the police, was attacked by people, had to learn how to fight to defend himself, got married to a white woman in the middle of a civil rights movement, had to pull strings to buy a house because people wouldn't sell to a black man. By the way, redlining is real. Redlining is real. That is a reality. So we'll talk about that next week when we talk about systemic racism and where it really comes from. But I think that we need to change the way we look at ourselves. It is possible. It says white privilege affords them the right to stay alive during a traffic stop. That's a fallacy. That's a fallacy. Last year in 2019, do you know that only 10, and I say only just because of a number, every life is precious, but 10 African Americans, unarmed African Americans, were killed by police officers. 10. And that is out of millions of police interactions. And also, statistically speaking, you are twice more likely to be killed by a police officer if you're white. And that's true. Those are real, true numbers. So the narrative that I'm in danger of getting killed because I get pulled over by a police officer is just, I think that's unfair to say that, because you're instilling an unreasonable fear based on stats that aren't true. The reality is this, and I want to speak to this as well. I saw a video online, and there was a young father, and he was consoling his daughter, and this is a black family, and the girl is crying in terror, saying, "I could be killed because of the color of my skin." I remember watching that, and I was so hurt to see that. But I wasn't hurt because this girl believes that because of the color of her skin, she'll be killed by a police officer. I was in pain because a parent was letting their child live in fear about something that was not even true. Unfortunately, that little girl is several times, I don't want to put a number on it and I don't have the actual number, but she is several times more likely to be killed by a black man in her neighborhood than she is by a police officer. Yet she's sitting there bawling in fear because she's saying, "Oh my gosh, I can be killed by a police officer." And see, it is that fear. See, the problem with fear is that fear causes hesitation, and hesitation causes those fears to become a reality. Because black people have been made to feel afraid of cops, and there's a reason for that, because we do have a history in this nation. We must acknowledge that. But if we don't tell them that things have actually gotten better, if we don't share with them that, hey, look, most police officers aren't doing that, and you're not risking your life every time you interact with a cop, then that fear comes in. And when that fear comes in, now when you do interact with a police officer, you feel like you have to fight for your life. So you do resist arrest. You do run. You do those things. And then somewhere along the line, you're going to run into a police officer who's had a bad day, or maybe he is racist and is just looking for an opportunity to let their anger out on someone. So instilling fear does the exact opposite. My father taught me to respect people in authority because that's what the Bible says. The Bible says to respect people who are in authority. So I respect police officers. In fact, one of the things that I teach my children is you show honor to them, because these individuals put on a uniform and they go out to protect and serve. And by the way, I think it is the stupidest thing, and I use stupid because it's in the Bible, the stupidest thing to defund the police. To say because of the actions of one, or I shouldn't say one because it's one in this situation, but of an extreme minority of police officers who commit police brutality and even death, because of an extreme low number of that now we're going to defund the police. Let me drop a stat on you, and please don't be mad at me because I'm sharing numbers. I do understand the feelings behind it, but numbers are truth, and we need to look at that. If we look at America, we can see that 6% of the population, black men, commit 44% of the murders. If we said because of the 6% of black men who commit 44% of the violent crimes and murders in this nation, we are now going to defund whatever funds the black community has completely, we're going to completely remove funds, everyone would be up in arms. Yet we have police officers, good police officers, who are going out there, who are putting their lives on the line on a daily basis, and because of the actions of an extreme minority, they're going to be completely defunded? That doesn't make sense to me. I think that's an atrocity. So, yes, most people make it out of traffic stops alive. You're not at risk. You're not. One is privileged and one is your journey and where it may lead you due to your circumstances. Both of them are a privilege. Remember, let's revisit a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. So the right to have all those things that I said earlier, such as less likely to commit suicide, less likely to have mental issues, less likely to have social issues, more likely to go to college, more likely to finish high school, less likely to experience teen pregnancy, all these different things that come along with having a father in the home. That is a privilege because it is only granted to those who have that father in the house, again, statistically speaking. So I think for us to create an entire narrative and define the relationship between a nation and a people based on the smallest of ratios is not only is it inaccurate, it's dangerous. And we're seeing the result of that right now. What we're seeing right now is the result of a system that is using our past pains to control us in the current time. And if you disagree with me, I 100% want to have a conversation. Please prove me wrong. I have no problem being wrong because then I can be more accurate in the future. I enjoy learning more. So if you have anything, please let me know. The person who wrote that, thank you for texting me your name. I'm not going to say it on live on the air. But if you'd like to have that over the phone conversation, shoot me a text and say, yeah, give me a call, and I will definitely give you a call. I appreciate that question, and I never want to come off as a know-it-all, but I do my research. I like to know that things are true, especially in a time where we're so emotional. Sometimes how we feel, it feels more real than what's actually going on, and that's just part of us being human. But I, as a leader of my home, my community, my church, I have to be responsible to go out and look past my emotions and my feelings and find out what is true. So then that is what we can communicate. Let's see. If white privilege is viewed as a hurdle and not a wall, it should make one stronger, not stop one completely. Let me read that again. If white privilege is viewed as a hurdle and not a wall, it should make one stronger, not stop one completely. I'm processing that, and I believe that I understand the concept here is that if white privilege is something that me as a black man I have to overcome, then technically any obstacle should make you stronger. And you know what? For me personally, I think it has. I think having those experiences of discrimination, of being judged, of being looked at wrong, and by the way, when I say being judged and being discriminated against, I've been discriminated for several reasons. I've been discriminated against because I'm black. I've been discriminated against, and this is more often, because I'm not black enough. That's the truth. I've been discriminated against because I'm a male. I've been discriminated against because I'm thin. There's been a ton of things. But I believe, especially as a Christian, especially as someone who embraces Christ, that every obstacle is an opportunity for me to grow. Think about it. When we hear motivational speeches, the motivational speeches that we love the most are the ones who actually endured something, who went through something and then overcame it. Yet when it comes to something like this, like racism, which is evil, we want to try and treat it like it's held us back. There is no obstacle in my life that I feel has held me back. They've all helped me grow and move forward. The only things that have really held me back have been my own choices in the midst of obstacles, or my choices that have created obstacles for me. So I think again, it really has to do with our worldview and how we see things. Let's see. Next one here. I am a white woman. Years before I gave myself to Jesus Christ, I was stopped by police who pulled a gun on me, was handcuffed, thrown into the back of a police car, and when questioned by detectives, I was accused by them of prostitution. That was years ago, but in my mind, this story shows that white privilege doesn't exist. First of all, I'm sorry that happened to you. The police, a lot of times, they're just trying to do their job, and they're just doing the best that they can. These are human beings, and I'm sorry that happened to you. But in this case, I don't know that white privilege it doesn't exist because of this. I think it more demonstrates that there's opportunity for everyone to fall into a place of where people confuse you for something that you aren't, based on your exterior. And I'm not saying you were dressing like a prostitute, but what I'm saying is if you were dressed up as going out on a night on the town, maybe you put a little bit of extra red lipstick on, or whatever those things were that to them identified you as a potential, prostitute. They're doing their best to do their job, but I don't think that in that scenario where they mistook you for something says that white privilege doesn't exist. I believe it does. I joke around with my wife. Sometimes I have to give her my credit card so she can go to the store, like if she lost hers or we're just going real quick and I have mine on me. And I always joke, I say, don't worry, they're not going to ask you. They'll ask me if I walk in with a Jennifer, but they're not going to ask you if you walk in with mine. And I'm kind of half joking, just kind of tongue in cheek. But the reality is I would get looked at with more suspicion than my 5'1", blonde-haired, green-eyed wife. It is just the reality, But on the same token, as far as discrimination and everything goes, if you're a blonde girl, then you had to put up with being called stupid your entire life. So there's no privilege in that. Everybody just thinks you're a dumb blonde. So everybody's experienced that, but I don't think that one experience means that the other one does not exist. It just means that discrimination exists on several levels. Let me see. Police stopping is real, but they don't go hunting black people. Some cops are just mean and rude. My white husband was harassed by white cops on multiple occasions, and yet people want me to teach my kids that they should fear the police or white people in general. It's sad and makes me angry how susceptible to fear people can be made to be mostly through the media output. I tell you, I agree 100%. Again, remember, you are more than twice as likely to be killed by a police officer if you're white. Statistically, they kill more than double the amount of white people as they do black people. Now, let me qualify that real quick, because you say, well, that's not fair because white people make up nearly 60% of the population, while African Americans make up 13% of the population. True, but we have to accept responsibility for this reality. That 13% of the population is responsible for nearly 50% of the criminal activity, and that is reality, and that points to us as a black community needing to do better too. But again, it comes down to fatherlessness, and that's something, again, we're going to talk about next week when we talk about systemic racism. But that's a very good point. A lot of people have been harassed. I've met black cops that were jerks. I remember I was stopped one time when I was a kid. I believe it was with my brothers. I can't remember if it was my brothers or my friend. And we're stopped, and we're just walking from the park home. And we were stopped by a black officer. This was in Huntington Beach. And this black officer put us on the ground, was so rude to us. And it was almost like he was saying, and I got this sense like he was saying, just because you look like me doesn't mean I'm not going to be hard on you. And he read us the riot act and treated us worse than any other cop that I'd ever experienced. It came from a black guy, and it was because he was trying to teach us a lesson and saying, hey, I'm not going to go easy on you just because you're black. And we weren't doing anything. All we were doing was walking home. As a matter of fact, that's the first experience that I have of being stopped by a police officer personally. So it's not always a black-white thing. You know, some people, and look, I love police officers. Most of them are great. But you do get those police officers just like you do with every other profession. You get those that are bullies. You get bullies that become police officers. You get people who were bullied that become police officers so they can get some payback. And then you get people that are just rude and mean. And I think we need to have a good filtering process. But the bottom line is it's never going to be perfect. And we also have police officers that have been on the job so long and seen so much that they do get tainted. And when you're in a community that's predominantly one color, and that's all you see every day, day in and day out, the crimes in these communities that are predominantly black, predominantly Latino, or whatever that is, then you start to shift your mindset about that culture. It's just something that happens. I think one of the things that we can do for police officers is make sure that they are moved to different neighborhoods from time to time, just so they can experience the diversity, not only in culture, but the diversity in criminal activities, so they don't get tainted by that. Because I have talked to police officers that say, hey, you know what? I know everybody's not like this, but it's hard, and day in and day out, you're in this particular community, and all you see is this community killing each other and robbing each other. And that's true. And we have to say that is a reality that they have to deal with. Continuing in their statement says, also, people are saying they don't want to celebrate the 4th of July because it's a white man's holiday and instead celebrate June 10th because that's when slaves were freed. That's a one-track mindset with a goal of tearing white businesses down. Well, I don't see why we have to not celebrate the independence of America. I think it would be great to celebrate the day that the blacks were freed. I think that's the emancipation of an entire people group is definitely something to celebrate. That's a great idea. I don't know why we're just thinking of that now, but I don't think you have to forego one for the other. Let's do both. Let's absolutely do both. You know, celebrating the 4th of July. I mean, like it or not, this is the nation that we live in, and statistically speaking, America has more opportunity for blacks than any other nation in the world, including Africa. That is true. That's based on a Harvard sociologist who is, liberal, by the way. There's a liberal Harvard sociologist that came to the conclusion, and this is a black man, by the way, that came to the conclusion that the United States still is the least racist and provides the most opportunities for African Americans than any other nation in the world. Now, I don't know what data he used. I didn't do any research. But if he's a black Harvard Harvard sociologist professor, that's some credibility. So I would tend to listen to him on that. So I'll get you his exact name and the information. Perhaps I'll put that in the comments. But yeah, I think we can celebrate both despite our tainted past. I mean, look, America, yes, we got some work to do. But if we look at America as we do us, especially as Christians, before I came to Christ fully, I was not a great person. I made a lot of mistakes. I did some things that I will never repeat. But I always tell people, and this is a hard truth, so y'all hear my heart on this. You guys know I love you. If you know me, you know I love you. And hopefully as you get to know me, you know I got nothing but love for everybody. I got nothing but love for everybody. But one of the things that we have to realize is that America, if we looked at it like a person, especially someone who is in Christianity, we believe that we get transformed when we come to Jesus. We admit our mistakes, he forgives us of our past, and then we move forward and we get better. If we look at America, haven't we done that? Haven't we made a lot of mistakes when we were younger? We were just doing what the rest of the world was doing. All the world had slaves. Africa had more slaves than America. The Muslim nations were the first to pull people out of Africa and use them as slaves. Europe had slaves. America was just following suit with what everybody else was doing. Just kind of like when you were in the world, you're just doing what everybody else is doing. But all of a sudden you realize that's not what I should be doing. That is wrong. And we went to war over it. And we had to change. We lost a lot of lives because of that. So we changed. We grew. We've gotten better. And statistically speaking, we are so much less racist than we were before. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that America is a racist nation at all. I think we're a nation that has changed, that still has racists in it. And by the way, racism isn't going anywhere. So long as there are people, there is going to be hatred. Because it is a sin issue. It is not a nation's issue. I mean, you see racism all over Europe. And not even racism, you see tribalism. I've been to Africa, I've been to Kenya, and I've seen the way that people treat people from a different tribe who are the exact same skin color. We need to realize that human beings are going to find a reason to hate no matter what, regardless of how you look. I'll hate you because you got money. I'll hate you because you don't. I'll hate you because you're from a different tribe. I'll hate you because you don't like my sports team. I mean, how many brawls have broken out over a sports game? Are you kidding me? That's a humanity issue. So I don't believe that America is a racist nation. We're just like anything else. And the police is not a racist organization. The police are there to protect and serve. But unfortunately, we have those who creep in. Hey, I found racism in church. So we have to break away from that narrative. It's not healthy to maintain that narrative. Here's a response. It says, I can work hard and have been successful due to my hard work. I'm resilient and nothing, not obstacles, even racism, has stopped me. However, there are some privileges we will never have. That is what I mean by impossible. Okay, so this is in response to the impossible comment. Thank you for coming back on that. I appreciate it. We can't change the color of our skin and how that is perceived. We can only change the perception of those that know us. Amen. I want to come back to that point. That what you just said right there is something that I recently communicated to a group of black men that got together to talk about this. And that is such a key point. Let me see. That is what I mean by impossible. We can't change the color of our skin and how that is perceived. We can only change the perception of those that know us. So good. We can't change the perception of those that assume all people of color are a threat. I have privilege just for being a lighter Latina. Amen. Now let me address that one point, and this is the key. And listen, what this Latina woman just said, everybody needs to hear, because this is how we change racism. And I'm going to be brutally bold and honest with you right now. Protesting does very little. It does do something, but it does very little in terms of actual day-to-day change. Actual day-to-day change. What changes people is us taking responsibility for projecting the perception of Christ. If we are a believer. If you're not a believer, then I would say this. The way we change racism and people's perception of a particular group of people is that we behave in a way that is contrary to what they expect. When I come in contact with someone, I call it the 3 C's, the 3 C's that I represent. Number 1, before I am a black man, I am a Christian. I'm a Christian. So that means that I represent my God and my beliefs. So every time I interact with someone, I have to keep in mind that I may be the only Christian, the only representation of Christ that they know. So when they interact with me, it gives me a sense of responsibility and accountability to love them the way Christ would love them, to show them mercy, to show them help, and to do everything that Jesus would do. And that is a privilege, to be able to represent God. Second, I represent my crest. My crest. And by crest, I mean my family, my heritage. When people interact with me, they're now going to have an assumption about my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, my wife, and my children. How I interact will have a huge part to play in how they view them. So I need to represent my family well. I want them, when they hear that they're related to Jesse Bailey, that there's a sense of honor and respect there. and not like, oh my gosh, I feel sorry for you. I'm sure some people feel like that, but I'm doing my best here. And the last thing is I represent my culture. And my culture, which is Christ, by the way, but my culture also represents my color. I'm a black man. I'm half black. Actually, less than half, if you want to be, mathematical about it. My mom was white, mostly Swedish Irish, and my father was African American and Chiricahua Apache. So, in the eyes of those who see me, though, I'm a black man. So when I interact with someone, I am representing the next black man that they're going to come in contact with. So it's not just about changing my perception. It's about changing the perception of a culture. The best thing I can do for another black man is to conduct myself in a manner that shows respect to everybody and gives love to everybody. So if somebody does have a bad taste in their mouth because they've had a bad experience with an African American, or because, let's be honest, the African American culture up until recently did not represent itself well in the entertainment industry. The whole hip hop culture, no one disrespected black women more than black men in hip hop culture. I mean, that's just a fact. If you look at some of the earlier movies that were black movies, there wasn't always a good representation, and we participated in that. So we perpetuated the image of a thug life and all of these things. So we can't be too shocked when people believe the image that we've been given for so many years, at least in the mainstream. And if you disagree with me, I would love to talk to you about that. But it's true. So we do, and this is such a great point. We have to change people's perception. And, you might have light-skinned Latina privilege. That may be a reality. But it doesn't mean that you haven't had to struggle through other things. And it doesn't mean that you need to feel guilty because that's how God made you. And that's kind of the point here with white privilege. Yes, there are some privileges that white people have. I have some privileges as a black man. I can stand up on a stage and start cracking on white people and every other race, and everybody will laugh. They'll think it's funny. But if a white guy gets up there and starts cracking on another, you are a racist, and you're lucky to make it out of there with your shirt still on. So there are certain privileges. I mean, we've created privileges for African Americans in order to offset some of the atrocities that we've faced. We've seen an increase in lending to black owned businesses because we have actually put in place programs to ensure that. So we've ensured that systemic racism can't continue in those things. The whole redlining thing that happened back in the 60s, I'm very excited to talk to you guys about what started that, why it's there, and how real systemic racism has come about. But a lot of those redlining practices, those are out. I was in banking for for 10 years, especially in the early 2000s, and part of the reason that whole real estate bubble popped and we had to bail out the banks is because we were making loans to people who weren't creditworthy simply because we wanted to make sure that we were hitting our quotas for lending in particular areas. So there was an advantage that we were given, but unfortunately a lot of people were taking advantage of people and putting them in loan programs that they weren't able to be in. So there is a lot that happened in all that. But what I'm saying is that there are programs that have been made available and that are encouraged through the government and through the banking industry to lend to people of color and in low to moderate income areas. So that is a truth. So there are advantages that we've been given in certain areas. The last thing here says, we have become so far left and right that every cause has become political. I do not disagree with you on that. Everything has become political. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. And here's why. What is politics? If you think about what is politics, everybody says, oh, that's a political issue. Politics has to do with governance. Politics is about how we govern the society that we live in. And again, keeping it biblical, according to the Bible, the job of the government is this, and it's very simple. This is the whole reason that we have checks and balances, we have laws, we have people in position, is to suppress evil. The whole purpose of government is to suppress evil. If you think about it, everything that the government does is about that. Regulating the banking industry, you're trying to suppress greed. Regulating, and I'm not saying we do the best job at it, but I'm just saying this is the purpose. So if the purpose of the government, according to the Bible, is to suppress evil, then that means that the government needs to be able to discern between what is evil and what is good, so they know what to suppress. Unfortunately, we are in the days that God talked about where we now call those things that are evil good and those things that are good evil. Getting political for a moment, why is it that we are outraged at racism, which is evil, and we want to show the utmost of offense, and we want to riot, and we want to make sure that that is eradicated? Yet, when it comes to the sin of homosexuality, we in the church celebrate it, protect it. If I started a protest against homosexuality, there would be an outrage. I would be called, a bigot, that there is no grace and no mercy on me. Yet, again, and these are just facts, statistically speaking, and there are 2 books, I have them right here in my office. Statistically speaking, 2 separate books written by secular sociologists and anthropologists. The number one sign, or I should say number 1 and number 2 sign of the inevitable and irreversible fall of a society, and this is after studying over 86 civilizations throughout history, the number 1 and number 2 sign are the dismantling of marriage, so marriage becomes devalued, and the rise of homosexuality. So history has proven that the breakdown of marriage and the rise of homosexuality are signs of an irreversible path that leads to the downfall of a nation. Yet, we're not talking about that. We're not protesting against that. As a matter of fact, we are defending that. When according to history and according to the Bible, that was the one thing that God actually rained down fire and brimstone on a city for. Well, not completely, because there was Egypt. But my whole point is that things are political because we are trying to establish what is good and what is evil. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that things get political, because that is the very heart of it. So when to Jesus, racism or brown kids in cages is not politics. Okay? It is a social and heart issue, not a political issue. I wish the church handled it this way. In regards to children in cages, it's funny, I was just looking at something today and doing a little bit more research on that. There's a lot, especially as a Latina, do some research onto why those kids were being detained and why they were being separated. If you do some research and you actually talk to some Border Patrol people who actually work in those, and not just listen to the media's got a narrative. They do. They just have a narrative. By the way, a lot of those pictures that were floating around were not under Trump's administration this last time. They were under Obama's in 2014. You can look that up. It's actually proven. There was a lot of pictures that were floating around under that. And I'm not saying, Obama's the devil and Trump is the savior. No, I am no man worshiper. I support a platform, not necessarily a person. We've all sinned. So, but yes, that's an important issue. But do some research on why those kids were being detained. If you look into what happens with kids crossing the border, it is horrendous. They were in those places to protect them, not to imprison them. One of the things that I always tell people is, tell me what I'm describing. Okay? It's a building made of cinder block, concrete, and iron bars. What am I? Your initial thing is a prison. And you would be correct. But you know what I was talking about, actually? I was actually talking about a castle. See, they're built with the same materials, but they have 2 different purposes. A prison is meant to contain, where a castle is meant to protect. If you do your research, there a lot of those kids were in there to protect them from what was waiting for them on the outside, and so that they could find out who they were. It's a social and heart issue, not a political issue. I wish the church handled it this way. Abortions are not right or left issue, but we have made it that. It actually is a left or right issue, because the bottom line is the left wants to pay people to have abortions. The left is, we talk about Black Lives Matter. We're going to talk about Black Lives Matter in a couple weeks. If Black Lives Matter, then why is it that we're supporting a political party that is funding the genocide of blacks? In New York, there are more black children aborted than are born. Yet we are worried because 10 unarmed black people were killed last year, why hundreds of thousands of black babies weren't even given a chance at life. I mean, if we think Black Lives Matter, if that's really the purpose of it, the protection of black lives, then why aren't we saying anything about that? And there's more to it than that. But it is, unfortunately, a left and right issue. The right wants to make abortions illegal. We want to defund Planned Parenthood, which we have under President Trump, and 900 of abortion clinics have shut down, which has removed the opportunity for people to murder their children. And we're going to have discussions on this. I know I'm being very blunt, but it is a left or right issue. I left the church during Trump's rhetoric prior to the election, not because I'm not open to some of his views, but because the church did not stand up against racist rhetoric. I am an immigrant and felt out of place in a church where the congregation was spewing the same rhetoric. It's not just your church. Oh, this is, I guess you're speaking about my church specifically. I never heard of anyone saying racist things towards Latinos. We have a very large Latino population at the church, and I've never heard that. I would have liked to have heard that if someone was saying that, but that's in the past. Where the congregation was spewing the same rhetoric. It's not just your church. I would have left any church at that time, as rhetoric was all over the Christian feed. It was hurtful. I truly want to see the church be more loving and open to listen to injustice and racism. You can have views about politics, but you can try and understand the plight of our Christian sisters and brothers. These are human issues. And that's your last rant. Please don't let it be your last rant. I'm enjoying this conversation with you. And you bring up a lot of good points. And, I never heard that rhetoric in our church. I think a lot of people were shocked by the fact that I supported Donald Trump as a Republican candidate. And again, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I just look at the platform and see which policies line up more with the Bible, and I go with them. If you guys remember in February of that same year, I was saying, please don't vote for Trump. He's got narcissistic personality disorder and all these things. But as the Lord would have it, because remember, every authority that is put into place is because God allowed it, whether it's Obama, Bush, Clinton, or Trump right now. This is all according to the Lord's plan. It's just why we vote for particular people. I don't particularly care for a lot of the things that he says, but what lasts after a presidency are the policies and procedures. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that too. I think we'll do a whole show just on Trump because it seems to be such a hot he's a very polarizing personality. I will say that. But she makes a very good point. And this is something that I am guilty of because I tend to be more of a black and white person, no pun intended. I'm very much truth and error. And I'm interpersonally, when I'm talking to you one-on-one, all I care about is making sure that you're okay. And if you know me, you know that's who I am. I'm not trying to say anything. I really do love people. I love everybody. But when I'm speaking in a group setting, I don't have the luxury of knowing every single person's story and what they're going through. So it's my job to do the very best that I can to present truth in a way that people can receive it. And sometimes the way that I present it is very, very strong and very firm. And that's because there's so much opportunity to be loosey-goosey about truth. And I think that's part of the reason why we are. So I apologize if I was ever a part of that or making anyone feel like they were dehumanized or their issues or concerns weren't heard. But I also want to be clear, I do not apologize for speaking the truth because that is my responsibility. I will never suppress truth for the sake of someone's emotions. I will try and adjust how I present the truth to be sensitive to the emotions, but I can never exchange truth for emotions because emotions come and go, but the truth will stay forever. So I appreciate the conversation. I really do. Let's see. While I don't think we should be bullying white people into using their privilege, I do believe that all non-black people should educate themselves about the oppression black people have experienced and empathize with them so that we don't make the same mistakes and we can lift our brothers and sisters up. I guess what I'm getting at is that being ignorant or turning a blind eye to hurt, injustice, and oppression that black people have faced is irresponsible. Amen. Amen. I absolutely agree with that. And we do need to educate ourselves. I do want to say this, that I do believe that the education system, at least what I went through, did a fairly decent job explaining the atrocities of our past. I think we do need to educate ourselves. We do need to be better at empathizing with people. But there has to be a balance, because what I'm seeing now, I'm seeing, friends of mine who are white literally being bullied. Like in tears, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What do I need to do? It's not your fault. If you're a racist right now, it is your fault. And you need to change, because that's evil and you're disrespecting God's creation. But if you've never done anything against me, I don't know all of the things that are repressing, Latinos right now. I don't understand all the issues. Does that make me a part of the problem? I don't feel like I'm a part of the problem, because I love everybody. My job as a Christian is to love everybody. And as far as blacks and oppression, I get it. We need to understand that. But there's so many other people too. Statistically speaking, the race that is most likely to be injured by a police officer is Native Americans. We don't hear anything about that. They're also the least populous. We don't hear anything about that. There's a lot of things, but we're not standing up for that. And I'm just going to throw this out there. Why? And this is to all the people that are saying all lives matter as well. Why aren't we doing those things? There's atrocities that happen to them all the time. The reason is because there's not a news camera, or there's not a camera there that's given to the news. And I'm going to be honest. I believe that the African American community is being used in several ways. They're playing on our pain to use us for political gain. I believe that 100%. Why is all this stuff happening now? I said this in 2017. I said, watch, 2020, we're gonna see this stuff. And here we are. So I think, yes, we need to empathize with what's going on, but we also can't fall into the narrative that things are so bad for black people. Again, according to the Harvard sociologist, America is the least racist and has the most opportunity for African Americans than any other place in the world. And if you don't think that's true, then why does everybody want to come to America? I don't see anybody breaking into Canada. I don't see anybody trying to break in, to Europe. You don't hear about that. Well, you do hear people breaking into Europe, refugees from the Middle East and so forth. But you understand my point. Everybody's not trying to get out of here. Everybody's trying to escape, oppression in Mexico. Everybody's trying to get out of Venezuela. Everybody's trying to get out of these places. But most of the time they're trying to come to America. That says something, that there is good here, and mostly good. So I just don't want to perpetuate or buy into a narrative that says that we as black people here are so bad off. And we'll talk about some stats a little bit later. And stats are important. I don't want to disregard feelings, but stats are very important because it helps us understand what's really going on. We have to get past our feelings and emotions. Emotions, I say it all the time, are great indicators. It indicates that there's something wrong, that we're feeling a certain way. It motivates us to change, but they are not to lead us into that change. We've seen over this last week what happens when people get emotional and, really, bringing it back to the Bible, get in their flesh. People aren't rioting and looting because they're so mad about what happened to George Floyd. That's a lie. They're rioting and looting because our carnal nature is always looking for an opportunity to break out and do what it wants to do. What happens with the rioting and the looting, that reveals what's in your heart. Whenever you get pressed, what's inside of you comes out. And that is the reality. Yes, we had Antifa people out there that are perpetuating a lot of the violence. But there are people from those neighborhoods going in and doing wrong. There's people from those neighborhoods protecting it too. But unfortunately for a 77-year-old retired sheriff, he got killed protecting his community. But nobody ever said anything about that. Nobody's talking about him. Nobody's marching for him. Why? Because there's no political advantage for that. All right, we're just about done here. I'm gonna take a couple more. This one says here, I believe white privilege has more to do with socioeconomic than skin color. Who would you say has more white privilege? The black baby born to a lawyer and a doctor, or the poor white child born to a crack mama? Mic drop. That is true. That is true. Now, with that being said, we do have to acknowledge that African Americans, because of the history, we're at an economic disadvantage. I mean, we're talking, we weren't even a complete person until 50, 60 years ago. We were still just part of a person. We weren't really getting the jobs because of discrimination until the last 30, 40 years. So there's been some ramp up time. And because of what I like to call old money that circulates through certain communities, we are at an economic disadvantage. However, the way I was raised, that is never an excuse to not succeed. As a matter of fact, it is more motivation. I saw my father work hard. This is a man who my grandfather shipped out of Texas because it was just too bad out there racially. He shipped him out to California because he thought he'd find less of it. And he did. But he got his education. He worked hard. And he raised 14 children, bought a house, took care of us, endured the loss of his wife, became a single father of 14 children, and still poured into us. I don't believe there's any excuse. The greatest privilege that we have is to be in America. We've all got American privilege. The very fact that you guys can stand out there and burn a flag and not get shot by the military police. Go try that in the Middle East. And I'm saying that's a privilege that we have. You're privileged to be born in America, where even those who are the poorest here, the homeless, we have programs for them. We have programs to help them. Now, we need to talk about homelessness because that's on the rise. But I'm just saying that it is a socioeconomic thing, and that black people were at a disadvantage. But we're gaining ground. We're seeing people graduate from college, get good jobs, enter into workplace, own their businesses. We gotta celebrate that. And as believers, as Christians, we again know that all things are possible with God. So let's overcome. We have to have an overcomer's mentality and not a victim mentality. Throwing things out like white privilege, like, oh, you can do this and I can't. That's a weak mentality. I mean, I guess the best example I can think of with this, and this kind of goes back to that video that I saw of the young girl crying in her father's arms. To me, that's bad parenting. Again, if you're just joining in, it's that there was a video of a young girl crying because she said, oh, I could be killed because of the color of my skin, inferring that she has to be careful around cops because they'll kill her. When statistically speaking, that is so untrue. And she's much more likely to be killed by another African American than she is a cop. And to allow your children to be in fear because of that and to develop that is part of the problem. The only thing I can relate to is my daughter. She's my oldest. She's a beautiful young woman. And we live in an area that is relatively good, but there are some pockets. And it doesn't matter where you are. Being a young girl in this day and age, when trafficking is a reality, is just not the safest thing. So I've had this conversation with her, but the manner in which I have the conversation is to empower her, not put her in fear. So I taught my daughter how to wield the knife, how to defend herself with it, how to hit somebody. Taught her how to defend herself, how to hit and run away. And my daughter's fast and she can do it. So I empowered her so that she can feel confident when she walks around and know what to do and not feel like she's a victim and be afraid to even walk outside the door. I have to empower my daughter, and I have to trust God. So we have to take a little bit more responsibility for the manner in which we train our children and tell them you can do anything. You can overcome anything. We do need to make them aware of the realities of this life, but we can do it in a way that is supporting them. Oh gosh, we got some more. Let me see. Oh man, I want to get to that one. Oh my gosh, you guys type so much, it makes it hard. Okay. Oh man. Sorry, I'm just reading this so I can summarize it a little bit. Okay, so the nature of this one, and I'm just going to be open and honest, is this individual didn't like the fact that I voted for Trump, and saying his principles line up with Christianity was a huge hurt. So there's a problem with liking his posts, and especially hard when it comes from your pastor. Okay, so the basis of it is a feeling of kind of abandonment by me, because as a pastor I supported Trump, and I want to focus on something, because it said supporting his principles, being Christian, and liking his posts and all those different things, and as an immigrant feeling that you're being jabbed. And facts are true, but acknowledging the feelings and everything. First of all, let me say this, and I kind of want to put it off for when we talk about Trump as a president. But first of all, I do understand the importance of acknowledging people's feelings, especially as an immigrant. And I don't have anything against immigrants at all. We have immigrants in our church. We have immigrants on our elder board, so it's not about that. What I have a concern with is doing things in proper order. So, and I believe Trump has been clear and unclear, at least policy-wise, it's very clear that the issue is with illegal immigration. Illegal means that you're breaking the law, and that is the problem. Is that there are people who are breaking the law, and there is an open door for drug and sex trafficking. Again, please look into that. It is a real issue. And I don't feel that the policies that have been put in place reflect a racism towards people of Latin descent. I believe it's more of a provision against people being illegal. I've talked to a lot of immigrants who have gone through the proper channels and process of becoming an American citizen so they can have a better life, that resent the fact that people can just come into the nation illegally and and receive benefits. Now, there's a lot to discuss in that, but I just want to say that it's not against immigrants at all. We're all immigrants when we go back, but it's against illegal and closing down the opportunity for drugs and sex trafficking in our nation. The southern border of the United States is a huge open door for much of that. Please do the research and find out. So I want to say that just in terms of immigration and my stand on it. And I think it's important to note that when everyone 4 years ago was in terror that he was going to deport all the Latinos, and I saw that, and I saw children crying and all that, that was absolutely ridiculous, because he was never going to do that. And truth be told, and everybody knows this, Obama deported way more people than Obama has over the last 4 years. Obama actually holds the record for deportations. So, but we all jumped up and down for him. So I understand that Trump lacks tact and presentation, but it's policy that I look at. And as far as me supporting his principles as Christian, I've never said that. You can go back and look at my messages around this time, which I got in a lot of trouble for. I had 30% of the church leave, but I don't think most people actually listened to what I had to say. They just felt. And this is why truth is important. I do acknowledge how people feel, but the reality is facts don't care about your feelings. Our feelings need to conform to the truth. The truth does not conform to our feelings. And I do acknowledge that people have a feeling about certain things, but I want to challenge you on this. Why do you feel that way? Do you feel that way because maybe you're actually buying into a narrative that's not real? For example, you just said that I supported his principles and called him Christian, that his principles are Christian. I never said that, and you can go back and look. I was very explicit and even said from the pulpit that I didn't support him personally. There's three things that you have to acknowledge with a president. There's their personal values. That is the values and systems of belief that they operate on and drive their character and actions. The second thing is their personality, how they interact with other people. And the third thing that I look for in a president are the principles of the platform. And the most important is the latter, the principles of the platform. Because what they put in place is going to impact everybody and the morality of our nation. Not the morale, but the morality. And then I look at the other two, their personality and their personal values. That's important, but not, to me, not as much as the policies, because I'm not asking this person to be my pastor. I'm asking them to be the president. And again, the job of a president is to discern between what is good and what is evil, and punish what is evil and reward what is good. Breaking the law is a bad thing, and that needs to be punished. There needs to be things that are set in place. And it's not his principles that I was standing for. It was the platform principles, and I was very clear on that. It was the platform, and I went through 7 issues. And you can go back online on YouTube and find it at our website. But I talked about 7 issues, and I just said, hey, look, on each of these 7 issues, and I chose the 7 issues based on the polarizing impact that they had, which means that each political party has very different views on it. I chose it because there are hot button issues on every election. And the third reason I chose it, most important, is that the Bible speaks explicitly on them. And it was based on those 7 things that I voted for a platform and not a person. Personally speaking, I don't particularly care for Donald Trump's personality. I don't align with his personal values. But when I look at the job description of what a president needs to do in terms of the Bible, his platform was more in line. So it was like, either I've got this person who, Hillary Clinton, who personal values, personality, I'm not really down with either. And her platform, as far as I'm concerned, just on the 2 basic principles that we see first, the book of Genesis, the foundation of our faith and our belief system and the setup of God is what he established in the garden. And there's two things he gave us. He gave us life and the command to be fruitful and multiply. And he gave us marriage between husband and wife. And the Democratic Party doesn't support either one of those in a godly way. They actually do the opposite. They believe that you can kill a child now in New York to when they come out of the womb, basically. And then now they want to redefine what God says is marriage, which again is a direct link to the downfall of a nation. So it was on those principles. It was never because I believe that Trump is world. And look, I can't stand the Trump worshipers. Have I liked things online? Yeah, but it's never really anything that he said. I may agree with a policy, but rarely have I said, yeah, I agree with that. And in fact, I've said this exact opposite. I don't post a lot on Facebook at all. I mean, this is the most I've posted in a long time. But in any case, I do understand your position in your point. But I do want to challenge you to really think about and go back and listen to those messages that I preached. There was a series. It's called Republic from 2016. It was October and November of 2016. And I preached 3 messages called The Republic. I believe one is No King but King Jesus, the role of church and government, and then the final one was right before the election, and I preached on Whom Shall You Serve. I believe those were the titles. So you can look on YouTube. Go back and listen to them, and listen to them through the eyes and the ears of someone who is supporting a platform and not a person. And I know it's very difficult to separate those two, but that is the reality of everything. But I appreciate you being candid and being honest and being open about it. These are the types of conversations that we need to have. This is what helps us come to an understanding and a love. So you thought I was supporting a person's values. I never was. And I know there's certain people that may attend our church that are, like diehard Trump worshipers. I don't condone that. And I speak about that candidly in those messages. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to highlight those messages and bring them up. Maybe I'll post them up so everybody can listen to them, so you can hear my heart. I'll go back, and if there's anything I need to repent for, I certainly will, because Lord knows I believe I've grown in these last 4 years. But with that, family, it is 9:05. I'm going to call this done. We talked about a lot of things tonight. We talked about white privilege. We talked about the church. We talked about politics. We talked about all these different things. So what I want to end with is a solution. What is the end of all this? What is the solution that we have here? How do we deal with this white privilege? I'll offer 3 things. Number 1, let's stop using the term white privilege as a means of shaming and guilting white people into doing things. Let's just leave that alone. As Christians, we don't need to be talking about that. You have a Christian privilege. You have the privilege and right to be called the children of God. That is a privilege that we want to promote to everybody. So let's get off the world and secular rhetoric and start focusing on Jesus. Stop using white privilege, the term, as a weapon. Number 2, for those people who do not understand privilege and all that means, do some research on it. Figure out what that means. And then, to be quite honest, there's not much more you have to do about it except be aware of it. I'm not going to make you apologize for being white. I'm certainly not going to apologize for being black. So I think we just need to let that go. But do your research. Understand where it comes from so you can understand what people are talking about. But we don't overcome racism by pointing fingers at people and saying that you have some privilege. Number 3, realize your privileges. Focus on the privileges that you have and stop pointing fingers at others. I think if we focus on the privileges that we have for whatever it is, we all have certain privileges, whether it's because we know God and have known him from a young age, if it's because we've been privileged to be born in America, if you had the privilege of having a mom and a dad at home, if you had the privilege of having siblings, if you've had the privilege of knowing somebody in a certain company that was able to give you a foot in the door so you can get that job and give you an edge above everyone else, whatever the privileges you have in your life, focus on those and focus on what is possible rather than what is impossible. If we focus on those blessings, then I think that'll help us all be more safe and secure about who we are and what we have, and then we won't be intimidated by what other people's have. Because ultimately, When we talk about white privilege, we're talking about feeling that we aren't able to have something because somebody else has. And according to the scriptures, that can lead to envy. That can lead to covetousness. I don't covet anyone who's white. I don't covet anyone who's darker than me. I don't covet anyone who's more athletic. I am content. And I'm grateful for who God made me to be. I'm grateful for all the challenges that I've had, because it's helped shape and mold me into who I am today, and they continue to mold me into who I need to be. So with that, thank you guys for being a part of The Bridge. I so enjoyed our conversations. Until I see you next time, keep it bold, keep it balanced, and keep it biblical. God bless, and good night.
Papa said build a bridge, must subtract the division. Discernment dictate decisions, relationship and religion. Hardest days to be balanced, seen the world so cold. Leaders barely being biblical, boys afraid to be bold. Ain't the Jesus I know, all praise to the chief. One and only high priest, son of God with the keys. Price of life ain't cheap, paid in blood not clean. Wanna cross over water, follow what he taught us, start walking. I'ma go build a bridge. Yeah, he said build a bridge. Lot of tensions on the sides, where it be dividing truth from the fibs. Christ lighting it's lit, time to go build a bridge. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, 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 bold. Papa said build a bridge, must subtract the division. Discernment dictate decisions, relationship and religion. Hardest days to be balanced, seen the world so cold. Leaders barely being biblical, boys afraid to be bold. Ain't the Jesus I know, all praise to the chief. One and only high priest, son of God with the keys. Price of life ain't cheap, paid in blood not clean. Wanna cross over water, follow what he taught us, start walking. I'ma go build a bridge. Yeah, he said build a bridge. Lot of tensions on the sides, where it be dividing truth from the fibs. Christ lighting it's lit, time to go build a bridge. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, 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 bold.